The summer of 1944 brought war to the quiet fields and hedgerows of Normandy. After the Allied landings on D-Day, German forces scrambled to contain the beachheads. The fighting was bitter and close. Villages became fortresses. Narrow country lanes turned into kill zones. British infantry units, advancing inland, faced some of Germany's best armored divisions. Among these were the feared Panther tanks. The Panthers carried a high-velocity 75mm gun and had thick, sloped armor that resisted most Allied weapons. Standard rifles and machine guns could do nothing. Even light anti-tank guns struggled to penetrate their front plates. The sight of a Panther rolling down a lane could freeze an entire platoon. To meet this threat, the British carried a new weapon, the PIAT, short for Projector Infantry Anti-Tank. The PIAT was a strange-looking device, heavy and awkward to carry. It did not fire like a normal gun. Instead, it used a powerful spring and a spigot mortar system to launch a shaped charge bomb. When the bomb struck armor, the shaped charge focused the blast into a narrow jet, burning through steel. If the operator aimed well, the PIAT could pierce even the front armor of a Panther at very close range. In theory, it gave foot soldiers a fighting chance against tanks. In practice, using it was dangerous. The range was short. The weapon's kick was brutal. Soldiers needed steady nerves to hold their fire until the tank was almost on top of them. In late June, near the village of Tilly-sur-Seulles, a British infantry section prepared for a German counterattack. The men were part of the 50th Northumbrian Division, pushing south against elements of the Panzerlehr Division. The landscape was a patchwork of fields, thick hedgerows, and sunken roads. Visibility was limited. Orders came down to hold a vital crossroad. The men dug shallow, slit trenches and camouflaged their positions. They knew Panthers were nearby. The sound of their engines carried through the still air like a low growl. As dusk fell, the first Panthers appeared. Their broad tracks crushed the hedges flat. The tanks fired into suspected positions, sending showers of earth and splinters skyward. The British riflemen hugged the ground. A corporal, trained with the PIAT, crawled forward. He carried the heavy weapon and 2 rounds strapped to his back. The plan was simple. Let the tanks come close, then strike from the flank. The corporal waited, heart pounding. At 20 yards, he could see the tank commander's head above the cupola. The Panther's hull filled his sights. He squeezed the trigger. The PIAT spring released with a violent jolt. The bomb shot forward, struck the side of the Panther, and detonated with a flash and a sharp crack. A jet of molten metal punched through the armor. Flames burst from the engine deck. The tank ground to a halt. The sudden kill shocked the German crew. Infantry following the tanks wavered. The second Panther halted, uncertain. Another British soldier reloaded the PIAT, his hands shaking. This time, the shot struck the track, jamming it. The crippled tank tried to reverse but slid sideways into a ditch. Machine gun fire from British Bren guns raked the accompanying German infantry. The attack faltered, then collapsed. Survivors retreated into the darkness, leaving the burning wrecks behind. The success of this small action spread quickly through the British ranks. Until that moment, many infantrymen believed the Panthers were unstoppable. The PIAT had proven otherwise. Though crude, it gave them a way to fight back. German reports noted the effect on their armored tactics. Panthers were forced to advance more cautiously, with closer infantry support. Tank commanders began to fear hidden PIAT teams lurking behind every hedge. This slowed their movements and blunted their counterattacks. In the days that followed, British units refined their methods. They used the terrain to their advantage, setting ambushes at choke points. PIAT gunners learned to fire from upper-floor windows or concealed ditches. Coordination with infantry and artillery improved. The Panther crews, once confident, grew wary. Each advance became a gamble. Some Panthers carried makeshift screens of wire mesh to detonate shaped charges before they struck the hull. Others moved only under cover of darkness. Despite these measures, losses mounted. By early July, the fighting in Normandy had settled into a grinding struggle. Villages changed hands several times. Casualties were high on both sides. The PIAT remained a vital tool in the British arsenal. It was not perfect. Its heavy weight and fierce recoil made it unpopular. But when used well, it could change the course of a skirmish. Many British soldiers credited it with saving their lives. German tank crews, in turn, came to respect and fear the weapon. The battlefields of Normandy were littered with wrecked vehicles. Some lay in open fields, others half hidden in hedgerows. The burnt-out hulks told the story of close-range duels fought by determined men. For the British infantry, stopping a Panther was not just a tactical victory. It was proof that, even against one of the most powerful tanks of the war, skill and courage could prevail. The PIAT was born from necessity. By 1942, British forces needed a weapon that infantry could carry and fire without heavy equipment. German tanks were becoming stronger and faster. Existing anti-tank rifles no longer worked against their armor. The PIAT, short for Projector Infantry Anti-Tank, offered a solution. It was designed to be man-portable and operated by a single soldier. Its appearance was unusual. A long tube housed a heavy spring and a spigot rod. Instead of using traditional gunpowder cartridges, the PIAT relied on its spring to drive the spigot forward. This spigot struck the base of the bomb and ignited the propellant inside it. The propellant pushed the bomb out of the tube and recoiled the spring, readying it for the next shot. The bomb itself was large and finned, with a shaped charge warhead. When it struck armor, the explosive charge focused its energy into a narrow, high-pressure jet. This jet could burn through thick steel. In theory, the PIAT could defeat even the heavy German tanks that were appearing on the battlefield. The weapon's smoothbore design made it simple to produce and maintain. But it came with serious trade-offs. The effective range was short. In practice, a soldier needed to fire from within 30 meters to have a good chance of hitting a moving target. Hitting a Panther head-on was almost impossible at greater distances. The PIAT's bomb traveled slowly, giving tank crews time to react if they saw the shot coming. Aiming required steady nerves and experience. The kick when firing was violent, often bruising the shoulder or knocking the firer backward. Cocking the spring by hand before the first shot took strength and effort. Soldiers who used the PIAT often complained about its weight and awkward shape. Despite these flaws, when handled well, it could destroy even the heaviest tanks. A direct hit on the side or rear of a German Panther could disable or destroy it. This made the PIAT a vital tool in the infantry's fight against armor. The German Panther tank was one of the most advanced armored vehicles of the war. It entered service in 1943, designed as a response to the Soviet T-34. The Panther had a high-velocity 75mm gun that could pierce any Allied tank at long range. Its armor was thick and cleverly sloped, causing many enemy shells to glance off harmlessly. At over 40 tons, it was a heavy machine, yet it moved quickly over open ground thanks to a powerful engine and wide tracks. This combination of speed, firepower, and protection made it a dangerous opponent. On the battlefield, the Panther often led German counterattacks. This presence could halt an Allied advance. Infantry and lighter tanks feared it. Standard British anti-tank guns like the 6-pounder struggled against its frontal armor. Only larger guns, such as the 17-pounder, had a reliable chance to penetrate, and those were difficult to move quickly through the hedgerows of Normandy. The Panther's design encouraged aggressive tactics. Its long gun allowed it to destroy enemy vehicles before they could get close. In open terrain, it was almost unbeatable. Close combat told a different story. The Panther's size worked against it in narrow lanes and dense terrain. Its turret turned slowly, making it vulnerable to infantry if they could approach unseen. The side and rear armor were thinner than the front. In these areas, a PIAT round could punch through and set the tank ablaze. For British soldiers, this meant waiting in ambush, letting the tank move past, and then striking from cover. It was risky work. A missed shot or a premature reveal often meant death. Panther crews, aware of this danger, relied on accompanying infantry to screen them from close attack. When German infantry and tanks worked together, they were difficult to stop. During the fighting in Normandy after D-Day, the clash between PIAT teams and Panthers became a common scene. British infantry used the terrain to their advantage. Normandy's bocage country was a maze of hedgerows, sunken lanes, and small fields. Tanks could not see far ahead. A well-hidden soldier with a PIAT could wait for the perfect moment to fire. The first sign the Panther crew had of danger was often the explosion of a shape-charge warhead tearing into their hull. Even with these successes, the task was never easy. Many PIAT teams suffered heavy losses. The short range meant they had to face machine gun fire and supporting infantry. The heavy recoil of the weapon slowed their rate of fire. If the first shot did not stop the tank, a second chance was rare. Still, their efforts disrupted German tactics. Panthers were forced to move more cautiously, often advancing in pairs or with infantry screens. This gave the Allies time to bring up heavier weapons and coordinate artillery strikes. The duel between the British PIAT and the German Panther represented a clash of design and doctrine. The Panther embodied speed, armor, and raw firepower. The PIAT, though crude and limited, gave foot soldiers the means to strike back. In the narrow lanes and hedges of Normandy, this balance of power shifted back and forth, shaped by terrain, timing, and the courage of the men who carried these weapons into battle. The hedgerows of Normandy were thick and high, like living walls that seemed to close in on the narrow lanes and fields. Their tangled roots and dense growth created a maze that was as dangerous as it was confining. British infantry from the Second Army crouched in shallow trenches dug into the damp earth along a sunken lane, their faces streaked with mud and sweat. The air was heavy with the smell of soil and crushed vegetation. Their rifles rested on the lip of the ditch, barrels black with oil and dirt, ready to be raised at a moment's notice. They had been ordered to hold this crossroads at all costs, no matter what came down the road. Somewhere beyond the hedges and distant farmhouses, German armor was massing for a counterattack. The men could already hear it. At first, it was just a low hum, almost like distant thunder. But as the minutes dragged on, it grew louder, a deep, steady rumble that never stopped. It made the ground tremble under their boots and sent a chill down their spines. The sound was unmistakable. Tanks, and not just a few. The section leader, a veteran sergeant with a battered helmet scuffed from past battles, crawled along the line on hands and knees, whispering to each man in turn. His voice was calm but urgent. They were facing Panthers. Even in a whisper, the name carried weight. Every man there knew what that meant. The German Panther was a monster, its heavy sloped armor almost impossible to penetrate and its long, high-velocity gun capable of cutting through Allied tanks like paper. In open ground, the Panthers were nearly unstoppable. British infantry rifles and Bren guns were useless against them. Light mortars and even smaller anti-tank guns often failed to do more than dent their plating. The only hope lay with a single weapon. The PIAT, a strange, heavy launcher carried by one of the privates crouched near the middle of the line. The PIAT was awkward to carry, its weight dragging at his shoulders. The private shifted nervously, his fingers gripping the weapon's rough, cold stock. He had fired it in training ranges back in England, but never in combat. The recoil, even in practice, had been punishing, and now his mind replayed that jolt again and again as he waited. His hands were slick with sweat as he checked the bomb for the 100th time, ensuring the fins were straight and the fuse tight. Around him, the other men adjusted their helmets and gear in silence. Even the sergeant's breathing was quiet and steady, as though everyone feared that a single noise would give away their position. The rumble of engines grew steadily louder. Leaves on the hedgerows trembled as if stirred by some invisible wind. Then came the faint clinking of metal on metal and the crunch of treads biting into the dirt road ahead. A German artillery shell screamed overhead without warning and exploded behind the British position, throwing up a shower of earth and shrapnel. The men flinched, their ears ringing from the blast. Machine gun fire followed immediately, spraying the hedges with deadly bursts. Branches and leaves were shredded, showering the British soldiers with fragments of wood and dirt. The sergeant shouted above the din, ordering everyone to stay low and stay silent. The British rifles remained still. They were hidden and waiting, relying on surprise. Their orders were clear. Let the enemy come close, then strike. Through the smoke and haze, the first Panther emerged from a gap in the hedge. It loomed over the road like a moving fortress, dark and massive, its wide tracks tearing up the earth beneath it. Its long guns scanned from side to side, searching for targets. Behind it came two more Panthers, their hulls so wide they nearly scraped the thick hedgerow walls on either side of the narrow lane. German infantry advanced alongside them, rifles ready and bayonets fixed, confident and aggressive. The sight of the three Panthers bearing down on their position was almost overwhelming. The British line, hidden though it was, would be crushed within moments if the tanks broke through. The sergeant made a sharp gesture toward the private with the PIAT. It was time. The private crawled forward on his belly, mud soaking his uniform, until he reached the very base of the hedge. The PIAT felt even heavier in his hands now. He braced the weapon against the ground and gritted his teeth as he pulled the massive spring back to cock it. It took every ounce of strength he had, the muscles in his arms and back straining as sweat ran into his eyes. At last, the spring locked into place with a metallic snap. He slid the bomb carefully into the open mouth of the launcher, checking its fit before locking it down. The noise of the approaching Panthers filled the narrow lane. The ground shook beneath him. The lead tank's tracks crunched through roots and rocks, leaving deep ruts in the earth and crushing anything in their path. The private raised the PIAT, sighting through its simple frame. His breath slowed. The side of the tank came into view, its armor smeared with mud and scarred from earlier battles. German infantry marched just ahead of it, unaware of the danger concealed behind the hedge. The sergeant crouched beside him and whispered for him to wait. Let the tank come closer. Closer. 20 meters. 15. The world seemed to narrow to the tank's massive steel flank. The private's finger tightened on the trigger. The PIAT fired with a violent, bone-jarring kick. The recoil slammed into his shoulder so hard it knocked him backward into the mud. The bomb hissed through the air and struck the Panther squarely on its side. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then a bright flash tore through the side plate, followed by a heavy, echoing crack. Flames burst from the engine deck, and black smoke rolled upward. German infantry scattered, shouting in confusion. The Panther lurched violently to one side, its track shattered, before grinding to a halt. The crew tried to escape, scrambling to climb through the hatches, but British rifles opened up in a deadly volley, cutting them down before they could get clear. The second Panther halted, its driver unsure of what had just happened. Its turret swung wildly, searching for the source of the attack. The private rolled to his knees, his hands shaking as he grabbed another bomb and forced it into the launcher. German machine gun fire swept the hedgerow, splintering branches and showering him with debris. The sergeant yelled for covering fire. Bren gunners rose from cover and fired furiously, their guns hammering at the advancing German infantry. The private fired again. This time, the bomb struck low, beneath the tank side armor, where the track met the road. The explosion blew the track apart with a deafening roar. The second Panther slid sideways and became stuck, its engine straining but going nowhere. Its turret tried to turn, but British fire pinned the crew inside, forcing them to stay buttoned up. The third Panther, seeing the trap too late, reversed hastily. Smoke trailed from its exhaust as it backed out of range, leaving its companions behind. The attack had been stopped cold. Chaos engulfed the field. British riflemen shouted to one another as they shifted positions. Empty shell casings rolled in the mud beneath their knees. German soldiers tried to rally and push forward, firing wildly into the hedges, but the wrecked tanks blocked the lane and their own momentum was gone. The smell of smoke, cordite, and burning fuel mixed with the stink of churned earth. A British soldier crawled forward under covering fire to drag the exhausted PIAT firer back into cover. The private's shoulder was already bruised deep purple from the savage recoil, his face pale but determined. With the Panthers disabled, British troops surged forward. Grenades arced over the hedges, bursting among the scattered German infantry. A flamethrower team advanced along the ditch, clearing it yard by yard. The Germans fell back in disarray, leaving their dead and wounded behind. The lane was now a tangle of twisted wreckage and fallen men, smoke rising in dark, curling pillars. The once mighty Panthers lay crippled and burning, silent proof that even the strongest machine could be brought down by courage, timing, and a single, ungainly weapon in the hands of determined soldiers. The crossroads had been held, and the noise of battle faded into a grim, uneasy quiet. The private lay in the mud, his heart pounding so loud he could barely hear the sounds around him. His hands trembled as he gripped the PIAT, its weight dragging at his arms. The weapon felt more like a burden than a tool. Each movement was slow, deliberate, his breath catching in his throat as he worked the heavy spring to cock it. He had trained for this moment, but training had been quiet fields and painted targets. Now, there was smoke in the air and the stench of burning fuel drifting over the hedges. Somewhere ahead, the deep, steady rumble of tank engines grew louder. He could not see the Panthers yet, but he felt them coming. The ground seemed to vibrate with each turn of their tracks. The men around him were silent, crouched low, rifles ready. No one spoke. Sweat dripped into his eyes. The sergeant gave him a firm look and a short nod. It was a signal, be ready. The private wiped his palms on his trousers and adjusted his grip on the PIAT. The weapon was unwieldy, and every muscle in his shoulders ached from carrying it all day. He hated it and depended on it at the same time. The first Panther appeared like a moving wall of steel, tearing through the hedge and rolling into the lane. Its long gun swung back and forth, searching. German infantry moved beside it, rifles at the ready, confident and fast. The sight of them made the private's mouth go dry. The Panther's hull gleamed dark through the haze of smoke and dust. Its engine growled as it advanced, crushing branches under its broad tracks. The private pressed his body into the earth and raised the PIAT. His breath slowed as he lined up the shot. Fear gripped him. He knew the weapon's faults. The short range meant he had to let the tank come dangerously close. If he missed, there would be no time for another try. He thought of the men beside him, counting on him to hold the line. The Panther loomed nearer. The sergeant hissed. Now. The private squeezed the trigger. The PIAT fired with a violent jolt, nearly knocking him flat. His shoulder screamed with pain. For an instant he thought he had failed. Then the bomb struck. The explosion ripped into the tank side with a sharp crack and a burst of flame. The Panther shuddered, its track buckling under the blast. Smoke poured from the engine vents. The German infantry froze, their formation breaking apart. The private stared, stunned, hardly believing what he had done. The mighty tank was burning. A second ago it had seemed unstoppable. Now it was nothing but a smoking wreck, its crew trapped inside. His comrades shouted, a mix of relief and triumph. The Bren gun opened up, cutting down the disoriented German soldiers. Someone clapped the private on the back, laughing even as shells whistled overhead. He reloaded with trembling hands, the second bomb slipping in place as the next Panther advanced. Fear still gnawed at him, but it was mixed now with something else. Determination. He had proof that the enemy could be stopped. When he fired again, his aim was steadier, his mind focused. The second tank ground to a halt, crippled. The lane was suddenly alive with British fire. Riflemen rose from cover, pouring bullets into the scattering Germans. The sergeant yelled commands, his voice cutting through the chaos. Inside the first Panther, the German crew was in shock. The driver had felt the blast tear through the side plate, filling the compartment with smoke and heat. For a moment, he thought the tank had hit a mine. Then he saw fire licking up from the engine deck. Panic spread. The gunner shouted that they had been hit by infantry. The commander's face went pale. This could not be right. The Panther was supposed to be invincible against handheld weapons. They had crushed every enemy who dared stand in their path. Now, with no warning, they were trapped in a steel coffin. The commander ordered the hatch opened. As he tried to climb out, bullets smacked into the armor around him. His loader pulled him back down, shouting over the roar of the engine and the hiss of flames. The driver tried to reverse, but the track was broken. The tank would not move. He realized then that they were finished. The Panther was no longer a weapon of war. It was a target. The German infantry outside were equally stunned. They had advanced behind the tanks with confidence, sure that nothing could break their line. Seeing a Panther knocked out at such close range shook them to the core. Some tried to rally and push forward. Others fell back in confusion, shouting warnings about a new Allied weapon. As the battle raged, British riflemen pressed their advantage. The private, still clutching the PIAT, sat back against the hedge, breathing hard. His comrades looked at him with a mix of admiration and disbelief. They had seen what no one had thought possible: a single infantryman stopping one of Germany's most feared machines. Around them, the lane was filled with smoke and cries, the wreckage of men and machines marking the ground where confidence had met cold reality. The crossroads fell silent except for the hiss of burning metal and the groans of wounded men. The two wrecked Panthers blocked the narrow lane, their hulks twisted and blackened. German infantry withdrew into the hedgerows, leaving bodies scattered among the ditches. British soldiers crouched behind the shattered hedges, catching their breath and reloading weapons. Smoke drifted low over the fields. The air carried the sharp stink of fuel and cordite. For a moment, the battle had paused, but its effect would carry far beyond this small stretch of road. The destruction of the Panthers at such close range stunned both sides. The German attack had been carefully planned. Panthers were the spearhead of the counteroffensive, expected to smash through British positions and regain lost ground. They were supported by veteran infantry and artillery. These tanks were symbols of German strength, their thick armor and powerful guns trusted to dominate the battlefield. Until now, that trust had been well placed. The PIAT changed the rhythm of the fight. British infantry, outnumbered and outgunned, had held the line where heavier Allied weapons could not reach. A single soldier, hidden behind a hedge, had stopped the lead tank. The second had been crippled moments later. The sudden reversal threw the German assault into confusion. Their advance stalled, and their infantry broke apart under the weight of British rifle and Bren gun fire. By the time the 3rd Panther reversed to safety, the attack had collapsed. This small victory did more than save a crossroads. It showed that German armor could be stopped without heavy guns or air support. Word spread quickly through the British ranks. Soldiers who had feared the sight of a Panther now believed they had a fighting chance. The PIAT was crude, heavy, and difficult to use, but it worked. Infantry units began to adapt their tactics, using the terrain to set ambushes and channel enemy tanks into kill zones. The dense hedgerows of Normandy gave them cover to get close. German commanders felt the shift almost immediately. Reports from the battlefield described tanks being knocked out by handheld weapons, something many officers had dismissed as unlikely. The first reaction was disbelief. The Panthers' sloped armor had been designed to defeat enemy fire, and German crews had relied on it. Now they realized that Allied infantry carried a weapon capable of piercing their flanks and rear at short distances. The effect on morale was sharp. Panther crews began to fear every hedge and every narrow lane. As a result, their tactics changed. Where Panthers had once charged forward to break enemy lines, they now advanced more cautiously. Tanks slowed their movements, waiting for infantry to scout ahead. Instead of pushing deep into British positions, they stopped often, checking for signs of PIAT teams. This hesitation gave Allied defenders valuable time. British artillery could be brought up, and heavier anti-tank guns positioned to cover likely approaches. The tempo of German counterattacks dropped. The psychological effect was as important as the physical damage. For weeks after the landings, German armor had been seen as nearly unstoppable. Their presence often forced British infantry to retreat or risk encirclement. After the first few Panthers were destroyed by PIATs, the balance shifted. German crews began to fight with a sense of uncertainty. They could no longer assume their tanks would dominate every encounter. A single hidden soldier with a PIAT could turn a powerful weapon into a burning wreck. The change rippled upward through German command. Armored formations were forced to adapt their planning. More infantry support was allocated to each tank unit, stretching manpower thin. Tanks moved in smaller groups rather than massed formations, making their blows less decisive. This weakened the German ability to launch coordinated counterattacks against the expanding Allied beachhead. On the Allied side, The success encouraged greater use of the PIAT. More units were trained in its operation. Supplies of bombs were pushed forward to frontline companies. In areas where Panthers were known to be operating, multiple PIAT teams were placed along likely avenues of advance. This layered defense increased the chances of ambush. Even when a PIAT team missed or was driven off, their presence forced the Germans to slow down and change routes. The weapon's reach extended beyond its physical range, shaping the enemy's behavior. As July wore on, these effects began to show in the larger campaign. The Germans were under pressure on multiple fronts. In the east, the Soviets were launching massive offensives. In Italy, Allied forces continued to push north. In Normandy, the Western Allies needed to break through the German lines and expand into open country. The German High Command relied on their armored divisions to hold the front and counterattack wherever a breakthrough threatened. When those divisions faltered, the entire defense weakened. The ability of small British infantry units to disable or destroy Panthers at close range chipped away at this armored strength. Each destroyed tank was a loss that could not be easily replaced. Even damaged tanks that were recovered required time and resources for repair. The Germans could ill afford these delays. Worse, the slower, more cautious advances meant they could not seize the initiative. Instead of driving the British back into the sea, they were forced into a defensive posture, reacting to Allied moves rather than dictating the fight. In the days following the clash at the crossroads, British units reported similar successes. In villages, lanes, and fields across Normandy, Panthers were struck from close range by hidden PIAT teams. Some attacks failed, costing British lives. Others succeeded spectacularly, leaving burning wrecks to block roads and sow fear among German forces. This pattern spread as more infantry learned to trust and master the awkward weapon. Strategically, the effect was profound. The Germans could no longer rely on their tanks to operate independently. Their ability to launch fast, decisive thrusts was blunted. Allied planners took advantage of this shift. They coordinated attacks knowing the German armor would be slower to respond. This allowed them to mass their own forces at key points, breaking through thinly held sectors. The PIAT did not win the battle by itself. Air power, artillery, and logistics all played vital roles. But its presence altered the battlefield in a way that multiplied the effect of other weapons. In the close terrain of Normandy, where engagements were often measured in yards rather than miles, the ability of one soldier to cripple a Panther had consequences far beyond that single moment. It forced the Germans to fight a different kind of war, one for which they were less prepared. As the campaign progressed, this cumulative pressure built toward a tipping point. Each ambush, each burning tank, each stalled attack eroded German strength. The British infantry, who had once hidden in fear of the Panthers, now moved with greater confidence. They knew that, with skill and courage, even the most feared enemy machine could be stopped. This knowledge, spread across the Allied lines, became a weapon of its own, turning the tide of the battle step by step. The PIAT was never meant to be a perfect weapon. It was born from necessity at a time when German tanks were growing stronger and the Allies had few options for infantry to fight them up close. Its design was crude and awkward, relying on a heavy spring and a spigot system instead of a traditional gun barrel. Yet its impact reached far beyond the hedgerows of Normandy. The moment a British soldier knocked out a Panther at close range with a single shot, a new idea took root. Tanks could no longer be seen as invincible. Infantry, with the right tools and tactics, could stand their ground against armored giants. This moment shaped the future of anti-tank warfare. Before the war, tanks were viewed as the kings of the battlefield. Infantry had been expected to support them, not destroy them. Heavy anti-tank guns were towed behind trucks or mounted on other vehicles. They were powerful but slow to move and easy to spot. The PIAT changed that balance. It gave one man the power to stop a tank. It showed that mobility and concealment could be just as important as firepower. After Normandy, the lessons spread quickly. The Americans had their own weapon, the bazooka, which worked on similar principles but used a rocket instead of a spring. Its range was greater, and it was easier to reload, making it popular with U.S. infantry. The PIAT, despite its drawbacks, proved that the concept was sound. Engineers studied its performance and began designing new shoulder-fired weapons with better range, lighter weight, and simpler operation. These developments laid the foundation for the post-war era of man-portable anti-tank systems. Modern weapons like the Law RPG and AT-4 all trace their lineage back to the experiments and field tests of World War II, where the PIAT was among the first to show what was possible. Tactics evolved alongside technology. During the early years of the war, tanks often operated with minimal infantry support, moving quickly to exploit gaps in enemy lines. This approach worked well when the opposing infantry had no reliable way to stop them. Once the PIAT and similar weapons appeared, that changed. Tank commanders could no longer ignore the threat posed by small groups of well-trained soldiers. They were forced to coordinate closely with their own infantry, keeping foot soldiers near the tanks to protect against ambushes. This shift added complexity to armored operations and slowed their movements. British forces in Normandy refined these tactics with each battle. Infantry squads carrying PIATs were assigned to key defensive positions. They were placed in hedgerows, ruins, and narrow lanes where tanks would be forced to pass. The goal was to strike at the vulnerable sides and rear of enemy vehicles, crippling them before they could reach the main line of defense. These tactics were risky and required careful planning, but they paid off. A handful of men could hold back a far larger armored force. For the soldiers who carried the PIAT, it became more than just a weapon. It was a symbol of British determination under pressure. Many who used it described their first successful shot as a moment they never forgot. The sight of a burning tank, stopped by their own hands, erased some of the fear that had haunted them since the first German offensives. The weapon was difficult to fire and punishing to the body, but it gave them a sense of control in battles where they often felt powerless. Stories of PIAT successes spread through the ranks and into the public back home. Newspapers and broadcasts spoke of infantrymen who stood their ground against Germany's most powerful machines. This built morale and reinforced the idea that ingenuity and courage could overcome material disadvantages. The PIAT became a part of Britain's wartime identity, a tool that reflected the resourcefulness of a nation fighting under immense pressure. For German tank crews, the experience was very different. Before the Normandy campaign, many believed their Panthers and Tigers were nearly invulnerable to enemy infantry. Their thick sloped armor had proven effective against most Allied weapons. When tanks began to fall to hidden PIAT teams, it created a deep sense of unease. Every hedge, every ruined farmhouse became a potential trap. Crews who had once advanced boldly now found themselves scanning the terrain for unseen threats. This psychological shift weakened the German armored force. Even when a PIAT attack failed, the mere possibility of one slowed advances and forced commanders to rethink their tactics. Confidence gave way to caution, and caution cost time. In a battle where speed and aggression were vital, this change in mindset was as damaging as the physical destruction of tanks. Historians looking back at World War II often focus on the big machines and the large-scale maneuvers. Massive artillery pieces, heavy bombers, and armored spearheads dominate many accounts. Yet the humble PIAT and other close-range anti-tank weapons played a role that is easy to overlook. They disrupted the balance of power at the smallest level of combat, where a single soldier's actions could shape the outcome of a larger fight. The clash between PIAT teams and German armor also offered lessons for future wars. Commanders saw firsthand how quickly technology could change the battlefield. A weapon that seemed unstoppable one year could be countered by a new invention the next. This constant cycle of adaptation became a hallmark of modern warfare. In the decades that followed, armies invested heavily in both offensive and defensive technologies, knowing that no advantage would last forever. The experience of Normandy also influenced how tanks were used in later conflicts. Designers added features like skirt armor and reactive plates to protect against shape charge weapons. Infantry training placed greater emphasis on coordination with armor, ensuring that tanks were never left exposed to hidden enemies. These changes were direct responses to the hard lessons learned when PIAT bombs slammed into Panther flanks in the tight lanes of northern France. Even long after the war, veterans remembered the PIAT with a mix of respect and resentment. It was heavy, punishing, and terrifying to fire, yet it gave them the means to fight back against one of the most formidable machines of the age. In museums and collections, preserved PIATs stand as reminders of a time when battles were decided not just by generals and grand strategies, but by the courage of individuals lying in the mud with a single shot to make. The Panther and the PIAT remain locked together in history. One was a symbol of armored might, the other of improvised resistance. Their encounters in Normandy demonstrated that no weapon, no matter how powerful, could remain unchallenged. The lessons of those clashes echoed through the decades, shaping the way armies planned, equipped, and fought in the wars to come.